What's up, Mr. Bromley? Michael Walsh here. This is a response video to the recent video you put out about squat depth. It's a video that I liked quite a lot. I liked most of what you had to say in it, but there was a couple of things that didn't sit right with me. The main thing having to do with athletes using high or quarter rep squats. So at the front, I just want to reiterate what I just said. I did overall enjoy the video very much. I like the axe you have to grind with the lengthened partial crowd. I feel very much the same way. Beyond that, I'm just a big fan of the channel. I've been a subscriber for quite a while. I think you put out great content on programming. I like that you call out exercise science for being the kind of fluff, soft science that it actually is, and point out that it isn't the invulnerable, robust, hard science a lot of its advocates and devotees would like to pretend that it is. I like that you'll point out the stupidity of looking at what are pretty poorly designed studies and treating their findings as if they're gospel, as if they're doctrine that should be used as prescription for everyone's workouts everywhere all the time. And I have immense respect for your competition accomplishments. You know, it's well beyond anything I'm ever going to do. I'm just a hobbyist. I'm just someone who lifts recreationally and likes to nerd out about this stuff. But, you know, I still wanted to give my 2 cents in response to your video. So ultimately, like, my issues break down into 2 categories. The first is something that really just is in need of clarification, I think. And the other one is what I believe is an actual, like, firm point of disagreement. And so that first issue, the one that I think just needs clarification, is when do you think athletes should be quarter squatting? Now, I'm going to show a few clips from your video, and I'm also going to show a comment that you left in the comment section because you and I had a very brief one comment exchange on my personal account. So I'm going to screenshot that comment and show a couple of short clips from your video just so that, you know, I'm not taking you out of context, or rather, I mean, I'm quite literally taking you out of context, but just so I'm not misquoting you or putting words in your mouth.
Just like with money, you need to have a little money to make money. Just like with this type of work, you need to have a physical foundation before you can do that shit. If you have your 8th graders try to do this, you're going to have a really fucking bad time. So start out with full athletic squats. It generally builds some muscle, generally builds some strength. But by the time you're towards the end of high school, getting into college, this type of stuff can be devastating for athletic performance.
So in that clip, I'm not entirely sure what you're really suggesting. Now, to me, in that and some of the subsequent clips, there's sort of a range of what you could be suggesting. And I think it really falls down into like one of 3 broad possibilities that range from like very disagreeable to maybe only moderately disagreeable. The first and kind of most extreme thing you could mean, I think, is that athletes need a general strength base. They need to first train with the general exercises that would be appropriate maybe like when they're in middle school, when they're in 8th grade. But once they graduate and go into high school, once they graduate, go to college, enter the pro leagues, once they become more advanced, that is when they can sort of leave those general exercises behind and do only specific exercises. So meaning, like, yeah, have your 8th graders do the general movements, have them do a full depth or parallel squat, but once they've done that, once they've moved on to high school or college, then they can just do quarter squats. And so for the rest of the video, I'm just going to refer to it as quarter squatting. I know that you show clips of people and it's not really quarter up squatting, it's, you know, just it's a few inches above parallel, and you show kind of different heights. But you do mention quarter up squatting, and just for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to say quarter squatting for the rest of the video. So the second thing that I think that could mean is that you think once they get out of 8th grade, once they go on to high school or college, then they're going to predominantly move on to quarter up squats, but they're still going to do some version of a standard squat, you know, parallel squat, full depth squat. They're still going to do some version, you know, on occasion. It's still going to have some presence in their training. It's overwhelmingly going to be replaced by the quarter rep squat. You know, if they're doing a parallel squat, it's going to be very much in the back seat, but it will still be done. It will still be done throughout the rest of their career. Now, the third, and, you know, I think most reasonable thing that you might mean is that once they get out of 8th grade, get into high school or college, they're still going to predominantly be doing something like a parallel squat. That's still going to make up the lion's share of the squat work that they do throughout the rest of their career. But you're going to bring in the specific exercise, the quarter rep squat, on occasion. It's going to be maybe something done at the end of a periodization cycle, maybe in the lead up, as they get closer to competition maybe. But it's not going to be done that often. It's going to be a minority of their squat training. Now, I recognize it's beyond the scope of the video for you to be, recommending what every kind of athlete and every kind of sport should be doing for their programming, how often they should be quarter rep squatting versus parallel squatting. That's not what the point of the video was. But nevertheless, you were making some kind of bold claims, I thought, about how important that kind of squatting was for athletes, and it was a little unclear what exactly you meant. So I'm going to show a series of clips from your video. I'm also going to show a screenshot of the comment that you left. I'm going to address them one by one, and I'm going to explore sort of which direction they seem to be tugging in, because when all is said and done, I'm still not quite sure what you meant.
For strength, you get stronger where you train. So make sure you're training in a range where you need to be as strong as possible. In powerlifting, that has to be below parallel. It's different for other sports.
So that clip seems to me to suggest that you think they should do more quarter rep squatting than parallel squatting. It seems to me that what you're saying is like, look, squatting 2 or below parallel, that makes sense for powerlifters, but other sports are, literally and figuratively a different ballgame, and they have different demands, different needs. They need to squat differently most of the time. That's how it sounds to me. I can only infer what you mean. I can't say for certain. I'm happy to be corrected if you respond to this and if I'm misunderstanding your intentions. But that is how that clip sounded to me.
Always keep in mind if your technique is serving as a general developmental tool, which is very important and should probably be a little deeper, or if it's supposed to specifically transfer over to performance, in which case that general quality goes out the fucking window.
So in that clip, that sounds even more extreme to me, because there it sounds basically like you're saying general strength goes out the window when you play sports, and that it's only the specific strength training that's going to carry over. And that I just firmly disagree with. And in any case, that really makes it sound like you're saying the quarter squat should be like overwhelmingly what athletes are doing, because the normal squat is going to barely help them at all, is what it sounds like you're saying.
And yeah, if you're going complete half or quarter squat, that should only be reserved for the most specific training, which usually just happens at the end of your training.
Now, so this one goes the other direction to me. This makes it sound like you're suggesting that the sort of special, specific exercise that you believe the quarter rep squat to be, that something like that sort of kind of gets tacked on, or maybe it happens at the end of a program. It's not the main thing you're doing. And that to me sounds like the third category. That sounds like you're saying even athletes should mostly be doing more standard squats and should be reserving the quarter rep for what is effectively special occasions or certain dedicated parts of programs. So now I'm going to show a screenshot of the comment. Now that, again, I could very much see meaning that you intend the third category, that you intend for athletes to still mainly do standard squats, do parallel squats or full depth squats, and only do the quarter rep squat sparingly. Because, I could read that as saying like, look, athletes, they periodize everything, they start broad and general, and then their training becomes narrow and specific. So something like a quarter squat, that is going to be seen at that narrow tip of that pyramid, but most of the work that makes up the base and foundation of the pyramid, that's going to be their standard squats. That's going to be, if you add up all of their squat sets over a big cycle, most of those sets are going to be done with the parallel or full depth squat, not the quarter squat. That I think is the generous interpretation, and from my perspective, that would be the generous interpretation. And I'm trying to give you I'm trying to be good faith in my interpretation of what you're trying to say. But I could also see that going the other direction. I could see your intention with that comment to be kind of applied more at a macro level, where you're taking an athlete, over the course of their career, and basically saying like, yeah, early on, when they're building a foundation, when they're in 8th grade, they should be doing general exercises, general training, but as they become more advanced, once they go from 8th grade to high school to college, they need to get specific, and there they should be doing specific exercises, like the quarter squat. So, once again, I'm not quite sure where you land on this whole thing. Some clarification, I think, would be helpful. But I think it's time to move on to the second issue, and this is the one where I think we just actually have a firm disagreement, and that is on whether the quarter rep squat is actually a specific exercise for sports. I do not believe it is, and this has to do with my understanding of the difference between general strength training and specific strength training. Now, I've always understood that general strength training, it's the basic fundamental movements, it's training broad movement patterns, it's training, it's trying to train broadly different muscle groups and develop a general all-around level of strength for the person or athlete. That's general strength training. Specific strength training, I've always understood to mean training, doing exercises, doing some sort of, strength exercise that's designed to mimic in full or in part the actual movements that are done in a given sport. And for my money, sort of the biggest champion of that, the sort of face of that kind of training is, to me, Michael Yessis.
Now this exercise is for throwing, and it's an action that all pitchers, baseball players, anybody who throws. Okay, then he's going to immediately rotate and pronate at the same time. Okay, so immediately rotate and pronate, turning the wrist or the hand outward. Okay, let's try it again. The ball is released right at that point. So that's where the ball is released, but then in the follow-through, there's more pronation and more medial rotation in the shoulder. That's it. Now back again.
But another great example that illustrates this concept is Dane Miller talking about training with Anatoly Bondarchuk.
So what is special strength? This is a term that gets thrown around quite frequently, but very few people actually define what special strength even is. Very few people even understand the full grasp of how Dr. B used special strength and what it even means. If we can start, the first key factor behind special strength training is that special strength is a movement that emulates the competitive movement. So if we can think about throwing a shot put with the glide technique, with the spin technique, something similar that we actually did with Dr. B was we would throw cinder blocks. We would do half turns with dumbbells. We would do half turns with heavy weighted discs. We would take heavy stands with a disc, heavy stands with a very, very heavy shot. We would throw barbells. We would do anything that would emulate the movement of the competitive shot. So if we were a spinner, we would do half turns with dumbbells. If we were a glider, we could do banded glides. Anything like this that's going to emulate exactly what that movement does. And the whole goal here is that the special strength movement is going to take the weight room strength that we're going to be developing and then unite that weight room strength to the circle.
Now, me personally, I don't have a super strong opinion about the upside of that kind of training, about the upside of, mimicking a sport movement with a rubber band tied to you. On the one hand, I see the logic of it. I see that many great coaches advocate it. Many great athletes have done it. I see it as, I see the logic behind it being sort of the glue that combines general strength training with the actual sport. At the same time, it seems so minimally loadable that I just don't know how much of an adaptation it's going to create, how much of a performance boost it can give you. But I'm no authority on the matter. I'm not a D1 coach. I'm not an Olympic coach. I'm just some guy. What I will say, though, is that that sort of training does have a benefit that quarter rep squats do not, and that's you can do that kind of training, that Michael Yessis, Bondarchuk kind of training in tandem with doing your general strength work, because it creates a very low recovery demand. You can do exercises like that at the end of your workout. Now, if you're doing heavy quarter rep squats, if you're trying to build some insane, through the roof quarter rep squat, that's probably going to be the main exercise of your workout. So that's taking time away that could have otherwise been given to your general strength work, because you're not going to do a heavy quarter rep squat and then later in that same workout do a heavy parallel squat. Now, further exploring whether or not the quarter rep squat is specific to sports or not, it seems to me the whole argument is based on the idea that the quarter rep squat uses a limited range of motion. The hip and the knee don't bend as much, they don't go as deep as they do in a parallel or full depth squat. And that's specific to sports because when you do things like jump in sports, you also don't go that deep. The range of motion is also much shorter. However, I think that's a very misguided way to look at it, because while that is technically true, the quarter rep squat still has very little to do with any of the movements when you do in actual sports. The quarter rep squat has much more in common with the parallel squat in terms of what separates it and makes it different from the movements actually done in sports than it has in common with those movements done in sports that separate it from the parallel squat. The closest thing I can see comparing the quarter rep squat to, and I think this is probably the origin of this kind of thinking, is the standing vertical jump. Now we see there the standing vertical jump, you don't squat down that deep. It is more analogous in depth to the quarter rep squat than it is to the parallel or full depth squats. But nevertheless, that's kind of where the comparisons end, because even a standing vertical jump is very different than a quarter rep squat. For one, there's triple extension. The vertical jump is a velocity-based exercise. The quarter rep squat is a max strength exercise. Even the arms, in a quarter rep squat, you're using the arms to help support the bar. In a standing vertical jump, you're using the arms to help create momentum. And what makes this, kind of even more absurd, I think, is that the standing vertical jump is just an exercise. It's done to train or demonstrate speed. It is not actually a sports movement. Jumping in sports looks even more different from a quarter rep squat than the standing vertical jump does. And furthermore, there's plenty of movements in sports that aren't even jumping, and they're even more different from the quarter rep squat. And those movements include running, throwing, hitting, kicking. And so, from my point of view, and the conclusion of my argument is that quarter rep squats are not specific to sports. They are not a specific strength movement. They are a general strength movement. And so then the question becomes, should athletes do quarter rep squats as a general strength movement? On this topic, I'm of two minds. I lean towards no. I think they're going to be better served by parallel or full depth squats. I don't really see much need or room for the quarter rep squat. However, I am open-minded and can imagine a few examples. So I could see a case where let's take a track athlete. Let's take a high jumper. And let's say they're well into their career, they already have a very strong back squat, full depth or parallel, maybe well into the 500s. And maybe they say to themselves okay, it's going to take a lot of scraping and clawing to add much weight to that. But if I start doing quarter rep squats, I could maybe blow that up. I could maybe get up to something crazy. I could get up to a 750 quarter rep squat. And maybe that leap will have some carryover to my performance. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I'm not convinced it will, but maybe it would. Even there, I would be inclined to question it. I would be inclined to wonder, have they just reached a point of diminishing returns with a more standard squat, and now they're just doing a new exercise, and they get some quick gains from it, and that maybe has carryover or doesn't, But at the same time, it's easy to mock the quarter rep squat, but it's not that different from other movements. It's a similar range of motion to a high handle trap bar deadlift, and plenty of athletes use the high handle trap bar deadlift. So hypothetically, let's take a baseball player, and let's say that baseball player just does limited range of motion stuff. He just does high handle trap bar deadlift, quarter rep squats, rack pulls, stuff like that. But let's say he builds up to a point where he can do all of them with 5 plates on each side. You know, he's still a reasonably strong person. That's still well into the intermediate level of strength. And frankly, most sports don't require more strength than that, and you don't see a lot of athletes who are actually stronger than that until you start getting into the high strength demand sports, like maybe heavyweight judo, or being a linebacker, or being a shot putter, or something like that. And so in that case, does it matter that the athlete is only training in a limited range of motion? You know, maybe it doesn't, honestly. But having said that, in general, you know, like if I were suddenly the strength and conditioning coach for the Yankees, or certainly for the the U.S. Olympic track team or something like that, I don't think I would have them do quarter rep squats basically ever. I think it would be pretty much all parallel or lower, and I just don't see much point in having them do something like the quarter rep squat. I did want to point out as well that there's a lot of debate amongst strength coaches about this. Will Rattel is a great strength and conditioning coach, and he has a great YouTube channel, and he has actually the exact opposite stance that you do. He thinks athletes should pretty much exclusively do full depth squats, and I'm going to show a clip here of him explaining it.
Pretty much everybody who trains, I guess just everybody in general, should be squatting to full depth. There's a few different landmarks that people use to determine what full depth is. Some would say hip joint below top of the kneecap. Some would just say that your hamstrings have to be covering your calves, or even just closed full flexion at the hip and the knee joint. I really can't think of a reason why anyone could make a legitimate case for opposing full depth squatting. There's other people who have gone through different research studies that demonstrate how full depth squats are more effective compared to half squats or partial squats at improving muscle size, maximal voluntary contraction, vertical jump height, 10-meter sprint times, or other metrics. So I'm not going to do that. Just go see Jump Science.
So in summary, I did really like the video. I like the overall message. I just had an issue with what you had to say with high and quarter rep squatting for athletes. That issue broke down into 2 broad categories. One was, simply a need for clarification on how often you think athletes should be doing quarter rep squatting. And the other was a more firm disagreement on whether or not quarter rep squatting is sport specific as a movement and not simply general strength training, which I believe it is. And bear in mind, I've been wrong about plenty of things before. I am just a hobbyist. I'm not an authority in the field. But I did think you were off the mark on this one, so I thought it merited a response. I hope you watched the video. I hope you enjoyed the video. It'd be cool to, discuss it further in some capacity. But, just wanted to say my piece, man, so take care.